History books tell you World War I began with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. That's the story most of us know. But if you dig deeper, you realize that the Archduke's death was merely the spark. The fire had been carefully stacked for decades. The real reasons are hidden in alliances forged in secrecy, militaries built in competitive obsession, economic debts quietly ballooning, and empires subtly maneuvering for global domination. On this channel, Obscura Imperium, we explore the history they erased and the patterns that shaped the first truly modern global war. The spark in Sarajevo. June 28, 1914, Sarajevo. A young assassin, Gavrilo Princip, a member of the Black Hand secret society, fired the bullets that killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife. On the surface, it was a simple act of political violence, a nationalist reaction against Austria-Hungary's rule over Bosnia. But the assassination was only the trigger. Behind it were decades of tension. Ethnic nationalism in the Balkans, Austria-Hungary trying to maintain control over its diverse empire, and Serbia eager to assert influence. While textbooks call it the cause, the deeper story involves covert networks, secret societies, and intelligence operations quietly pushing Europe toward the edge. Alliances that made war inevitable. Europe in 1914 was a tightly woven web of alliances. The Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, stood against the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Britain. These alliances were meant as deterrents, yet they functioned like a chain reaction mechanism. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia mobilized to defend its Slavic ally. Germany, bound by treaty, declared war on Russia and France, following the infamous Schlieffen Plan to strike France quickly. Britain was drawn in when Germany violated Belgian neutrality. A localized assassination turned into a continental inferno within weeks. This intricate network of promises and threats shows how diplomacy, instead of preventing war, became the instrument that unleashed it. Militarism. Europe ready to explode. The early 20th century saw a dramatic military buildup across Europe. Germany and Britain were locked in a naval arms race, while France and Russia expanded their armies. Military planners drafted strategies for wars they assumed would happen eventually, creating a situation where any small spark could lead to total mobilization. Germany's Schlieffen Plan, for example, was a timetable of invasion that left no room for delay. Armies were not just defensive instruments, they were ticking time bombs. History rarely admits that World War I was as much about preparation and obsession with military power as it was about politics or assassination. Imperialism and the global stage. The European empires were not satisfied with their continents alone. Colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific were economic and strategic prizes. Germany, late to the colonial game, wanted its place in the sun, threatening British and French dominance overseas. Competition over resources, trade routes, and influence made global conflict almost inevitable. When war finally broke out in Europe, it immediately extended to Africa, Asia, and even the Pacific Islands. The so-called European War was truly the First World War because the fight for colonies ensured no continent remained untouched. Nationalism, the double-edged sword. Nationalism was both fuel and fuse. In the Balkans, Slavic populations sought independence from Austria-Hungary, creating pockets of rebellion and underground networks. Meanwhile, in France and Germany, national pride and historical grudges created public pressure on governments to act aggressively. In Britain, a sense of duty to protect Belgium and maintain European balance combined with patriotic fervor to make war almost inevitable. Nationalism turned ordinary citizens into enthusiastic participants and politicians into pawns of public sentiment, adding pressure to military planning and political decisions. The economics behind the scenes. War is expensive, and before World War I, Europe was a powder keg of economic tension. Nations were heavily indebted with large military expenditures draining treasuries. Financial elites, banks, and industrial magnates were quietly financing armaments and war preparation, anticipating massive profits once conflicts erupted. Germany's industrial military complex, Britain's banking houses, and France's colonial investors all had stakes in a war-ready Europe. Money wasn't just the fuel of armies, it was the silent architect of conflict, creating obligations and pressures that politicians could not ignore. Some historians even argue that certain information instruments and bonds were positioned to profit from impending default risks and post-war reconstruction, a world where war is profitable for the few, deadly for the many. Technology and modern warfare. World War I was not just another European conflict, it was the first modern industrial war. Machine guns, long-range artillery, chemical weapons, and the first tanks reshaped the battlefield. Trench warfare created a stalemate that demanded total mobilization of societies, including women in factories and colonies supplying troops. The scale and intensity of combat were unprecedented. While soldiers faced bullets and poison gas, behind the scenes, generals and strategists were testing new technologies, laying the blueprint for future global conflicts. This era also marked the beginning of information manipulation. Newspapers, posters, and early propaganda shaped perception and morale, making civilians complicit in the war effort. The hidden politics, alliances, and betrayals. The war was also a political chessboard. Italy switched sides in 1915, despite being part of the Triple Alliance, lured by promises of territorial gain. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, while Bulgaria followed suit. Neutral countries faced intense diplomatic pressure to pick sides or risk isolation. Each maneuver was calculated. Alliances were promises, but also traps. Small nations found themselves pawns between empires, while major powers used treaties and diplomacy as tools to manipulate mobilization timetables. War was not spontaneous, it was engineered by decades of negotiation, threats, and mistrust. Casualties and human cost. World War I resulted in over 16 million deaths and 20 million wounded. Entire generations of young men were lost to a conflict fueled by complex systems of nationalism, militarism, alliances, and imperial ambition. Civilians suffered famine, disease, and economic collapse as governments focused on total war. Yet this devastation also set the stage for World War II, economic instability, and the rise of extremist ideologies across Europe. History often sanitizes war with dates and treaties, but the real cost was human lives and social upheaval on a continental scale. The lessons they buried. On the surface, World War I is a story of assassination, alliances, and trench warfare, but beneath lies a pattern that repeats across centuries: economic manipulation, hidden political agendas, secret military preparations, and propaganda shaping public perception. The war was both planned and inevitable, shaped by forces most people never learn in school. Observing these patterns helps us understand modern conflicts, economic wars, and the subtle maneuvers that precede global crises. On Obscura Imperium, we believe that understanding the hidden currents of history is essential to anticipating the future, because the First World War was not just fought on the battlefield, it was also fought in boardrooms, banks, and secret councils. The spark, the powder, the pattern. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand was a spark. Alliances, militarism, nationalism, imperialism, and economic intrigue formed the powder. When the gun fired, the world exploded. World War I shows that global conflicts rarely begin with obvious triggers. They are built slowly, deliberately, and often invisibly. Understanding these hidden layers, the economics, the alliances, the human psychology, is the only way to truly comprehend why the First Global War occurred, and why the shadow of its lessons still looms over the world today. Follow Obscura Imperium to uncover the forces that shaped history, the patterns that repeat, and the stories that they tried to erase. Because while others scroll, you dig, question, and remember.